In this series, the show writers decided to take more than a few incredibly lazy shortcuts to tell the story. As a result, it created several monstrously large problems with not just the internal consistency of the show itself, but also the entire Star Wars canon. These are the sort of things I would expect to see on a grade school writing exercise, but it's hard to believe that the people hired by Disney to create this show, which is part of a billion-dollar franchise that costs millions of dollars per episode, are simply incapable of creating a coherent story. What's worse, however, is that the show creators either don't realize this, or they simply don't care. Honestly, it's probably both. Obi-Wan is bad. Episode 2. This one finally starts on a planet that isn't covered in sand, so 3 cheers for small miracles, I guess. Obi-Wan is looking for Princess Leia, but he doesn't have any sort of actual plan other than to just wander around and hope the plot drops something into his lap. And as luck and plot convenience would have it, something does. A random person approaches him asking if he wants to buy some special substances, to which Obi-Wan says that he's just looking for information and he's trying to find his daughter. The dealer, who feels bad for him, gives him an extraordinarily large sample of the substance, and I have to imagine that something like this would probably be worth quite a few credits, but it needs to happen because, well, lazy writing, and it needs to set up something further on. Just then, some more luck and plot convenience walks up to Obi-Wan and offers the assistance of a Jedi, and the next scene is quite predictable. Because, as you might imagine, it's not a real Jedi, it's just someone pretending to be one, so when it finally gets revealed in the show, everyone acts surprised.
Interesting.
Now we get to meet the fake Jedi, which turns out to be this guy who, for the life of me, I can't remember. Is this Harold or is this Kumar? I think it's Kumar. Anyways, we get to see Kumar do a couple of tricks, moving things around. It's obviously fake, and he uses magnets and different things like that.
Yeah, bitch! Magnets! Oh!
But he convinces the woman to leave the planet with her son, as he is supposedly Force-sensitive, though it never actually explains if this is true or how he would possibly know this. It is clear that he's scamming people, and he takes a lot of credits from the woman in order to get her passage off-planet. But then later on, we see that Kumar is actually trying to help people, and he's part of this big organization that moves people around, but he's also scamming people, and I guess he's lying about them being forced. I don't know, whatever. It's just never explained. Obi-Wan confronts Kumar about being a fake Jedi, and he's able to get a little bit of information about the possible location where Leia is being held. So Obi-Wan heads over to that place, and outside of the building, he sees some sort of employee leaving, and he steals his uniform. As it turns out, the building is making a lot of those special substances that we saw earlier, and yet for some reason, there was absolutely no security whatsoever on this door. Obi-Wan simply walks in and looks around. Not a single person in there stops to wonder why this suddenly unknown human is strolling around in the midst of their operation. But it gets dumber, because in full view of everyone, Obi-Wan takes a bunch of the chemicals and sets them over a fire until it eventually causes a small explosion. At this point, several people go to investigate it, and they see Obi-Wan slowly walking away from it, and yet not a single person stops to think that it might be a good idea to ask Obi-Wan some questions about what happened, or that they even recognize the fact that he's never been seen there before.
Nothing to see here!
It would seem that Obi-Wan is playing a new stealth video game on a mode that's so easy it must be called Game Journalist. Regardless, he moves into the next hallway where he finally gets challenged by a few of the mercenaries, and there's a quick fight with some really awful choreography, and Obi-Wan searches one of the nearby rooms, only to be surrounded by yet more of the mercenaries. Let me paint this picture for you. Obi-Wan is being held against the wall with 2 different mercenaries, each holding a blaster to his head. After some really cringy dialogue, Obi-Wan very clumsily takes the special sauce out of his pocket, where everyone can see it, and then he very slowly smashes it on the ground, and yet neither of the mercenaries has the reaction speed or the intelligence to simply pull the trigger to prevent Obi-Wan from escaping.
That's pitiful. I mean, it's absolutely pitiful.
It's like they weren't even paying attention. Regardless, the mercenaries start coughing, and Obi-Wan quickly escapes from the room. Already this episode is just stuffed to the gills with lazy plot conveniences, but don't worry, it gets worse. Obi-Wan does some more searching and manages to find the correct room with Leia and tries to convince her that he's there to save her, but she's very hesitant and believes that he's hiding secrets or something, which is going to be used as an extremely stupid excuse to do something really dumb later in the episode. Outside, Riri has arrived and forces her way into the building by acting super tough to the bouncer, which I'm sure is supposed to make her look strong, but instead it just makes her look like a bitch. Also, I don't see why it would be necessary anyways, considering that she's the one that hired the mercenaries that operate in this building, so shouldn't they be expecting her?
Excellent point.
Riri finds the mercenaries, who are still under the effect of the special sauce, and realizes that Obi-Wan must have already been there. She heads back outside, where she's met with the Grand Inquisitor, who is very upset that she's been going off on her own. He then tells her that she's low-born scum, and that she always will be. He then removes her from the mission, effectively firing her. It is painfully obvious that the writers were trying to make some sort of ham-fisted real-world comparison with a white guy in a leadership position talking down to a black woman.
Definitely an N-word.
But of course, Riri ain't gonna listen to no man, so she ignores the Grand Inquisitor's orders and puts out a message for every single mercenary on the planet to provide information if they see Obi-Wan. Then we get a scene that is very, very clearly copied directly from a John Wick movie. All of the mercenaries receive messages, and then they start picking up their weapons and looking around exactly like what happened in John Wick. Seriously, if this was any closer, then Keanu Reeves would be getting a paycheck for it.
Whoa.
Continuing, Obi-Wan and Leia are walking through the city, and Leia is constantly talking quite loudly about the Jedi. This is going to be a recurring thing throughout the series. Jedi are essentially the most wanted people in the entire galaxy, and even talking about them will draw a huge amount of unwanted attention. Despite the fact that Leia is repeatedly told to stop talking about this, she simply continues on, putting both her and Obi-Wan at risk.
Most girls are idiots.
It's here we get one of the most hilariously stupid scenes in the episode. For some bizarre reason, Riri decides to climb on top of the building and perch there just like she was pretending to be Batwoman. To be very clear about this, there is absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the writers did intend for Riri to look like Batwoman, and it's really, really dumb. And it doesn't even happen just once either. Over the course of the next few minutes, this show will come back to this view of Riri watching over the city, and it just looks fucking ridiculous. Speaking of stupid things, for some unknown reason during all of these scenes, Obi-Wan keeps taking his hood and putting it on, and taking it off, and putting it on, and taking it off, and every time he takes it off, it reveals his face, and I don't know why he would do this since he's trying to hide his identity, and as a result, some random mercenary walking by happens to see him with his hood off, and recognizes him, which causes a little bit of a fight. Obi-Wan is able to quickly take him out, but while he's on the ground, the man's watch begins showing a hologram of Obi-Wan's face, which Leia sees. She then comes to the ever-brilliant conclusion that Obi-Wan is actually the real kidnapper, and she decides to run away from him. And this goes back to the thing I mentioned before, where she doesn't fully trust him because she thinks he's hiding something, and this is what she thinks he was hiding, which of course is incredibly stupid, but remember that the show creators are repeatedly trying to portray Leia as being the smartest 10-year-old in the galaxy, and yet she's not capable of understanding that when she was taken from the building, the real mercenaries would begin looking for the man that was bringing her away. She's not capable of understanding this. But don't worry, it gets worse. We now get a repeat of the outrageously stupid chase scene from the first episode, except this time it's even dumber, because rather than just some random bumbling mercenaries, somehow Leia is the fastest 10-year-old in the universe, and she is capable of outrunning a Jedi.
Oh, you can smell the shit from 5 miles away.
It's kinda hilarious watching Leia waddling along through the street, with Obi-Wan deliberately moving slower in order to not catch up with her, but the most ridiculous part of it is right here. Obi-Wan is so close, he can touch her, and yet for some reason, he again just lets her run off. Now you might be thinking, well, hold on, Obi-Wan doesn't want to create a scene, and he doesn't want to draw attention, but not even 2 seconds ago, one of the mercenaries recognized Obi-Wan and he was forced to shoot the guy with a blaster. So I'm pretty certain everyone in the entire area is already paying attention. Well, except of course for the writers. They're definitely not paying attention, because Obi-Wan should have been able to just pick up Leia and then take off. As the scene continues, mere seconds later, we see Leia running down this alley with Obi-Wan nowhere to be found. Leia is able to get all the way down the alley and climb a ladder to the top of a building before Obi-Wan even appears in the alley. Keep in mind, it was just mere seconds ago that Obi-Wan was close enough to touch Leia, and yet somehow she was able to increase the distance by over 50 feet in the span of seconds.
How about new?
Leia then proceeds to run across the rooftops, jumping from building to building, and Obi-Wan finally has a good reason to not catch up, as on top of the buildings, he begins getting shot at by some mercenaries, and he's forced to take cover. Reva is still sitting on her idiot's perch, and she sees the blaster fire in the distance, and begins making some of the most awful parkour using guide wires. I mean, just look at this and see how incredibly bad it is. Leia eventually reaches a building that is too far away, and when she jumps, she begins to fall. Obi-Wan reaches over the side to see Leia hanging on some wires. It should also be noted at this point that the 3 different mercenaries that were still shooting at Obi-Wan just mysteriously disappear and all the blaster fire stops. Where did the mercenaries go? No idea. They just kind of decided to take a break apparently. Honestly, having the blaster fire continue while Obi-Wan is trying to get Leia probably would have been better, as it would have increased the tension in the scene, but obviously the show creators have no idea what they're doing. And it gets dumber because as Leia can't hold on to the wire anymore, she begins to fall, at which point Obi-Wan struggles to use one of the most basic of Force powers. This show actually wants us to believe that Obi-Wan somehow forgot how to use the Force.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
The Force and its powers flow through a person, and once it's been learned, it's not something that you can unlearn or something you can forget. It becomes an extension of the person. It would be like forgetting how to use your arm. It's just ridiculous that they're trying to portray Obi-Wan as forgetting how to use the Force. Regardless, Obi-Wan finally remembers and manages to lower Leia slowly to the ground, and then when he gets down there with her, Leia finally accepts the fact that he's a Jedi and that he's there to save her.
It's been 84 years.
They head over to the starport to find that it's been locked down, but thankfully Kumar shows up out of nowhere and tells Obi-Wan how to get off the planet using an automated transport shuttle. Obi-Wan doesn't really trust him, but they don't have much of a choice. We then get some more hilariously bad parkour from Reva until she runs into Kumar. He continues pretending to be a Jedi, but she instantly realizes that he's not one since he doesn't have any sort of Force presence, and then she uses the Force to read his mind, which gives her the exact information she needs about where Obi-Wan is going and what he's doing.
It's very convenient.
Very convenient.
This is the part of the episode that completely breaks the internal consistency of the series.
All right, explain this to me like I'm a 2-year-old, okay?
Since Reva can effortlessly get information out of Kumar's mind, I have to ask, why is this not a technique that the Inquisitors would use all the time? When they arrived at the tavern in the first episode, why did Reva and the other Inquisitors simply not read the mind of the tavern owner to get the identity and the location of the Jedi? Why did they have to put on a stupid dog and pony show where Reva has to trick the Jedi into revealing himself? It would have taken her less than 5 seconds to get that same information from the tavern owner. And then further on in the first episode, when the Inquisitors were confronting a large group of people in the town, Reva decides to threaten Owen instead of just using this extremely easy Force power to effortlessly get the information from him. You would think that a tool this effective and easy to use would be the #1 go-to for the Inquisitors. Reva could have gone through each person in that large crowd, quickly reading their minds to find the information on the Jedi. Even a large group of people of 30 or more would still take less than 5 minutes since she seems to be able to scan a person's entire mind in just a few seconds. Now, while it's true that this skill has been around for a while, it usually requires a lot more effort in order to get it to work. But since Ririva can get it to work within seconds, from here on out for the rest of the series, if there's any time when Ririva needs to get information, she should be using this technique. Continuing, Obi-Wan and Leia make it to the automated transport facility, which for some reason is not being guarded, despite the fact that the entire area is supposed to be locked down, preventing any flights going in and out. This would probably be a pretty important location to protect, and yet there is absolutely no one here.
For some reason.
But mere seconds later, Ririva shows up, and Obi-Wan hides like the coward he is. She begins monologuing, trying to draw him out of hiding, and she reveals that Anakin is alive and that he is Darth Vader. This comes as a complete surprise to Obi-Wan for some reason. He wasn't aware that Anakin was actually Darth Vader, and that is really stupid.
This is terrible.
Obi-Wan was well aware that Anakin was a Sith Lord and the apprentice of Palpatine. Was Obi-Wan somehow under the mistaken impression that there was another heavily injured Sith Lord who needed to be encased in a protective suit that just so happened to appear at the exact same moment as Obi-Wan's fight with Anakin? It may not be common knowledge for the rest of the galaxy to know that Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader, but to somehow suggest that Obi-Wan was so fucking stupid that he was incapable of making the connection of a heavily injured Anakin becoming Darth Vader in the suit is an outrageous insult to Obi-Wan.
Don't ask questions. Just consume product and then get excited for next product.
But it gets even dumber. Suddenly, the Grand Inquisitor shows up and begins chiding Ririva. There is no reasonable explanation for why he would suddenly show up here, nor is there any reason for him to be alone and not at least have some of the stormtroopers with him. It only happens because the show needs it to happen. As the Grand Inquisitor begins to use the Force to move some of the containers aside, Ririva very slowly and clumsily stabs him with a lightsaber. I didn't pay much attention to the character of the Grand Inquisitor in the comics or the previous cartoon versions of Star Wars, but I do know that he was a much more interesting and significant character than how he's being portrayed in this show. What's funny about this, though, is that Disney is now breaking their own canon with what just happened. While Disney does want to dismiss most of the extended universe stories, some of them were created by LucasArts and thus were considered canon within the Disney universe. The Grand Inquisitor was one of those such characters, and he met a very different end. So by taking out the Grand Inquisitor right now, they have broken their own canon for no other reason than to further put up that insufferable and unlikable Ririva even further up on top of a pedestal that she never earned.
She was such a strong female woman.
Obi-Wan and Leia use this as a distraction to jump on the transport, and they manage to leave the planet. But as bad as all of this is for what happened with Disney breaking their own canon in this episode, it doesn't even compare to the amount of destruction to canon in the next one. This show is about to get worse than you can possibly imagine. But for now, that's the end of episode 2.